You have relationships and obligations with many stakeholders, including your boards. You and your boards are deciding long-term, short-term strategic plans in some instances, and I don't know that it applies to any of you. Decisions are being made around budget, which might involve furloughs, which might involve layoffs. How do you as directors, CEOs, balance the wish to be open and disclosing with your staffs with the need to make some decisions on your own or in consultation with other people and keep them to yourselves at certain stages? That feels tricky and delicate to me. How do you do that?
Very carefully.
Very delicately. Yeah, I find it's important to be honest and upfront with what the facts are as I know them, without sort of any overlay of either like overconfidence, like, but don't worry, it'll be okay, or like, I'm extremely panicked and freaking out right now, somebody help me. There's an important piece of being sincere about, like, I was upfront immediately about the stress that I was feeling about my responsibility to others' employment, and what that, you know, if we're going to experience like LCJP, like all of these nonprofits, and most nonprofits have so many different funding sources, and it's so hard to predict how each of those will be affected or respond to this whole thing, this whole crisis. And so I was upfront about the ones that I knew all the staff would be most concerned about, like the most obvious things that would come up for people I could name, and then also talk about specifically what I was doing to try to adjust and make accommodations. Like we applied for that PPP small business loan. And so I just kept people apprised of how that was going. And then we celebrated when we knew that we were going to get that loan and what that meant. And I did have a few staff members who followed up afterwards and said like, hey, if we were to get laid off, when would we know? How much notice would we get? You know, so I think there's an important piece of being upfront so that they know they can ask those questions, even if I could only answer those questions again with the information that I have. But I think there needs to be that sense of security that they can ask, that we're not all going to like pretend like, oh, you know, everything's going to be okay, just sit tight, because that's not realistic either. So I think trying to be clear and sort of giving a universal message outwardly, and also making sure that the lines of communication are open for smaller conversations to take place too.
Great.
You know, for us, I want to echo that and maybe restate it in my own terms, is that you don't give a response to somebody about a question that they have if you don't know the answer. That's just poor leadership around the block. And so being very comfortable with saying, I don't know, but let's figure it out, and let's find out more information and what sounds like the right agreement or commitment. In terms of the financial stuff, or whether or not, you know, we were going to furlough or lay off any staff or reduce hours or any of that kind of thing, there are a whole lot of we don't know, right? Let's see what happens with this funding source. Let's see what happens with whether we see sickness in our programs. We also guaranteed everybody paid time off before the CARES Act came out. I think most people did. Most people who care about their teams did, if they could, right? And so there are always potential barriers to that for nonprofits that are functioning pretty slim. We're just in a fortunate position where we could say, look, no matter what, you're going to get paid and you're not going to face hardship for the time being. The trick is that some stuff is way on the horizon, right? In terms of whether or not people might get laid off, but we jumped into modeling financially really quickly and looked out over the long term and said, here are some indicators. If we're at this place, then we will talk to you 6 weeks prior to that our thinking is we might make cuts, and we're going to figure out how to do that together. Now, Ellen, to your point, those conversations take place in a little bit of a vacuum, and then we have some information that we bring to the rest of the team. And we even discuss how we're going to present that information. And we might do it in stages or iteratively, like, hey, look, this is what you can expect in the not too distant future. The hard thing for us is that we have 24/7 programming that we have staff in multiple locations. This isn't a financial thing. We were really concerned about the well-being of our staff. And I want to say first and foremost, their well-being. Because if they're not okay, we don't fulfill our mission, and we're not taking care of the well-being of the people we're meant to serve. And it got really challenging to figure out how to work schedules so that we were insulating some managers and case managers so that they could backfill if our shift staff got sick. I mean, the real complications around that were very difficult for us conversationally to navigate with teams, because managers would say, well, wait a minute, what about if this? And we didn't have clear answers to all those questions. And so, you know, frankly, being able to just say, I don't know, what do you think? How can we figure this out together? Is more than enough if you don't have the answer. I have always had this like desire, I think it's a human trait, to answer questions that I get asked by people. And so it can be very dangerous not to have that switch that suggests, don't answer this question because you don't have enough information.
Yeah.
And then get busy finding the answer to it, or you know, whatever.
Yeah, and to add on to all of that, I think that what is clear from this conversation is that we have been doing a lot of this work already pre-COVID, right? And the transparency that I've tried to achieve during this crisis mirrors the transparency that we had before this crisis, right? I've been in organizations where staff didn't really care what was going on at the sort of board level or the strategic level, and that's not the case with my team here. And so they've been pushing me since I started this job to really talk a little bit more about what's going on at the strategic level. And so, you know, we were fortunate that this was never an existential crisis for us, right? We're in a good financial position, and we're still sort of following up on plans to do some expansion and to acquire another nonprofit that's struggling, that has very mission-aligned programming. And so when this first happened, we met as a board and talked about sort of worst case scenario and came up with those plans, but those were never seriously considered. And so I didn't share any of that with leadership team or staff, but I do share everything that is being seriously considered at the board level, and not all at once, right? After a board meeting, you've made all of these decisions, and it's a lot, right? And I'm personally titrating my access to news media because doesn't make me feel good if I binge on that, right? And so I try to adopt the same model with how I talk about these things with staff, right? And we talk about sort of one strategic issue a week or twice a month, so that they know that they're being involved, that they're being included in those discussions, and they have opportunity for feedback, but they don't feel like all of these decisions are being made one night a month, right? That we can be thoughtful and considered about these things. So, and that has been a hard line to walk, especially as the economic realities will force us to maybe make decisions about how people spend their time. But we've been very fortunate that it's not meant that we really have to discuss furloughs or layoffs in any real sense yet. And so that's been a big part of keeping up staff morale, right? Is knowing that this isn't an existential crisis, and our volunteers, communicating that also to our volunteers, who then don't feel the need to call staff and sort of ask a bunch of questions that will sort of upset the balance that we've been trying to achieve.